It seems strange to me that the regulator's proposals to increase capital won't address the problem of extreme risk. Why is that?
The problem is that we don't have a clear relationship between level of capitalization and probability of survival. Let me give you an example from the last financial crisis. If you look at the most spectacular failures of financial institutions, banks, and you can see that their capital ratios were not very low at all. I would say most of these banks were very well capitalized based on the overall requirements of the regulators. At the same time, some banks which had much lower capital ratios, they survived during the crisis quite comfortably. And the problem is the measurement of the risk. Capitalization tells us how much capital bank holds against the risk, how much capital holds for each unit of risk that bank is exposed. While capital is quite easy to measure, and we can measure it with high level of precision, at the same time, denominator, the risk, it's very difficult to measure, especially extreme and tail risk. I would say at the current stage, the measurement of the tail risk is unachievable task. So what we calculate in our denominator is a very rough approximation of the risk that bank is exposed. So what happens, we have a clear view how much capital we have, but we have very vague view what we have in our risk as a denominator. So that is why I think that most of the discussions about what should be the right capital ratio, for me it's quite strange, because we start to argue about 1% up and 1% down, but we don't understand how much risk we are exposed. So the measurements of the capital on risk is the most challenging task at the moment.
In terms of the Basel III regulators' approach to liquidity, do you see the same kind of problems as there are associated with capital, or have they actually managed to do that rather better?
At the moment, liquidity is a very hot topic, and I'm going to say maybe a not very popular statement. I don't believe that liquidity, individual liquidity of banks, is very important in terms of survival. Why I say this? Everybody says liquidity is a key, and in the last crisis we observed many financial institutions that struggle with liquidity, and they say liquidity is our problem. But I believe that liquidity per se is very rare cause the fundamental problem of banks. Yes, indeed, when banks go bust, you always see the liquidity problem at the end. But if you start to analyze each and every case, you can see that fundamental problem why the bank went down was not liquidity at all, and normally some fundamental reason either in business strategy or in business model or strategic mistake of the management done before. So that is why I believe that individual liquidity is not the key question in the terms of this risk management framework.
But there are some classic cases, I'm thinking of Northern Rock, where liquidity actually crashed the bank.
Yeah, indeed. If you look at on the surface, you can see people queuing in the branches to take money, and it is a liquidity problem. But at the same time, if you make a step back 3-4 years before it happened, and if you look at what was the business model that Northern Rock implemented, you can see the fundamental problems. For example, if you look at on the asset side, you can see that in the last 3-4 years preceding the crash, Northern Rock built their assets like a crazy, 40-50% each year. And at the same time, they calculated risk-weighted assets, which represent their risk. And you can see they believe that risk is almost flat. So in other words, they believe that they acquired risk-free assets, which was not the case. On the debt side, they borrowed money and built debt again very, very high level and increased financial leverage substantially. So if you look at all these assets and debt side, you can see it's a recipe for disaster. So sooner or later it should happen, And even I can ask the question why Northern Rock, following this business model, could survive till 2007. But I think they could bust even earlier. So I don't think that liquidity was the problem. I think business model was completely wrong.
So liquidity is a symptom, or lack of liquidity is a symptom rather than a cause of the problem.
Exactly. It's normally one of the necessary steps in the path to the crisis. But it's definitely not the cause, it's a symptom. And also when we discuss liquidity, it is necessary to distinguish between individual liquidity and systemic liquidity. That is two different things. And to demonstrate that, I would like to mention Wolf-Pack syndrome. I don't know if you're aware of, but we know wolves, they live in the nature and they survive as a pack. And they survive because they help each other, they hunt together, and as a result, the pack survive. However, if extreme hunger prevails, what we can observe that wolves start to look at who is the weakest link in the pack, attack it, eat, and survive. That's what we call wolf-pack syndrome. In the financial world, we can observe the same situation. As a banks, we live as a pack. We support each other, we provide liquidity, we lend money, we give insurance to each other. But if panic prevails on the market, banks start to behave as a wolf pack. We immediately look at who is the weakest link. And then we see weakest link is Northern Rock. And we cut liquidity line. And in several weeks, Northern Rock is out. Then we look at who is the next weakest link. And it's going on and on again. Individual liquidity will not cure the situation. Even if we keep 1 month of liquidity, which regulators require us, it will not help us. The only medicine that's already been invented and very effective is a central bank. In this situation, central bank need to step in and restore the financial stability. So if we look at on this situation, I would say for survival, we still need central bank to be the active in the liquidity, but the individual liquidity is not as important as you can imagine. So to summarize all these bullet points, silver points that regulators proposed, I think that they mostly focus on the symptoms rather than on the fundamental cause of extreme risk.